Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Without further ado, I'm going to get Sujay to set the stage for the conversation that we're about to have. Sujay, take it away.
First, of course, in pharma, how do we consolidate our position with the US, where we have a pole position, but of course with IRA and price erosion and spend on specialty pharma, what does that mean? Second, in terms of innovation, how do we make innovation more affordable in the context of our country and its needs, specifically in cell and gene therapies, specifically in the context of biosimilars? How do we digitize at a much faster pace across the value chain? In terms of climate, if pharma and health were a country, they'd be the fourth largest emitter in the world. So what does society expect and what do we do better with that? And the pace of PE activity, which Shirin referred to, which we'll come to in a minute. Similarly, on the health services side, the point that Shirin made about expanding capacity, how do we digitize in this very massive country to take it further and onwards? What does ABDM, which is Ayushman Bharat Digital Mission, or even the PMJ mean in terms of expanding the standard of care across the country? How do we make India a better clinical trial destination or one for medical tourism? And finally, last but not the least, with increased PE ownership of the health sector, what does it mean for patient and patient pricing? It's important to remember that it's not about the industry's next phase of growth, but this is a very critical industry. Every nation depends on education and health to power the next phase of growth. So if we were to receive the demographic dividend, it's but imperative that we reflect on these questions. And so really look forward to discussing and hearing perspectives on these trends from leaders here.
So without further ado, Umang Vohra, I'm going to come to you. And let's get the elephant out of the room, so to speak. You're not just dealing with a company. You're dealing with an institution. You're dealing with an 85-year legacy. That is the legacy that Cipla enjoys. The question today is, the radical transformation that Sujay spoke of, are we likely to see that radical transformation mean that Cipla is no longer going to be the Cipla as we know it, and it is going to be sold?
There's certainly a lot of news in the media about various transactions, interests. This is a significantly large sector for the country, and one to be proud of. I think the ethos of this sector is not going to change. I think care is still going to be deeply rooted in how India sees its role in the world. I can't specifically comment on any transaction in the public, but all I can say is that it's a fragmented industry, and one could expect that with the type of interest that's being shown, that there would be some amount of consolidation that could occur.
What will be the drivers for any potential consolidation?
Yeah, so I think that let's look at a couple of big themes that are going around the world, right? The first is people want to stay healthier for a larger portion of their time. They don't want to be sick, right? And so one of the biggest trends we're seeing that will drive consolidation in the segment is just this whole transition from illness to wellness, right? So you are going to track your own health, and that basically has the power to disrupt how we see healthcare today. Right? So we've always seen healthcare as something that's tending to the sick. We're going to see healthcare as something that's tending to everyone. So in comes digital, in comes the connect, in comes diagnostics at home, in comes medicine at home. So that's one trend. The second big trend we're going to see, in fact, this is a challenge for India, is that, we are the pharmacy capital of the world when it comes to chemical synthesis. We're not the pharmacy capital of the world when it comes to biological synthesis. Yeah. So I know Rahul's here, and he should talk about it. I think the future of therapy and the way we see healthcare is actually going to be a lot more of biology. It's going to be, chemistry to match biology, but probably a lot more of biology. I think that's going to trigger a lot of reallocation of capital from chemistry perhaps to biology, right? And at the central level, maybe some amount of thinking about healthcare. So that's the second big change. The third is this is the world of data. Right? A lot of us companies have a lot of data, but we don't use it well enough. And there are a lot of these other smaller companies where data is still not central to what we do. So I think that's going to trigger a different way of looking at your business models. We don't necessarily within Cipla need huge manufacturing facilities anymore. A plant the size of this room can actually cater to what we've been doing with much larger plants. So a lot of this digitization, miniaturization of healthcare is probably going to happen. So I think those are fundamentally the drivers of consolidation. But the biggest one here is I always ask this question to everyone, and Rahul and we've had discussions on this as well several times in the past. Who's going to pay for the innovation?
Yeah.
right? So it's okay to say we have to be biologically sensitive, etc. But someone's got to pay for it. Innovation is costly. And so unless the affordable thesis of India expands significantly or insurance expands significantly, and by the way, that's going to be a pressure point to consolidate as well. Because if there are less number of people who are going to pay for innovation, then the number of people who are bringing innovation has to consolidate.
To the point that Umang was making, where does the capital come in to drive the kind of innovation that we want, the kind of innovation that everyone here is excited about and is hoping for?
We are called pharmacy of the world. But what is next? I think next is something which is more innovative technologies. And to develop these innovative technology, we need capital and we need funding. And I think now the different companies, visionaries, along with the government, like private people as well as government, they are putting some funds. Of course, these are some available funds, but a lot more is needed. So I think we should invest more in innovative technology. I think that's the future.
Sanjeev, again, speaking of the opportunities, the journey that we've covered, but more importantly, the breakthroughs that we need to make and the challenges that you foresee today in being able to realize some of the goals and the opportunities that we just spoke of.
Yeah, I think, thank you again, Shireen, for inviting me. Normally when Umang speaks before you, he covers most of the points. But it's true. I think the whole cycle that we need to change from chemistry to biology is very important. And we basically need 3 or 4 things to work well. Number one, of course, what we mentioned is of funding. And Rahul is right that private equity generally will jump in when they see a much better situation. Venture capitalists might jump in earlier, but private equity might jump in a little later. But with the PRIP scheme or some other things happening with the government, I think there will be some amount of funding that will come through. And people are now risking capital to ensure that some funding goes through. What we might do require is a few success stories to ensure that the global market also looks at India from the biology space. And we are starting to see some of that happening. As Rahul would discuss, or I am discussing with some global regulatory agencies, they are also getting surprised at what are the things happening in India, and that's good. So that is one thing that a global regulatory agency is sending out a message that they are looking at India or at the innovation happening here. The second very important aspect is that we have to realize, and Umang actually mentioned it, illness to wellness form, but preventive on one hand and cure and remission on the other hand is getting more important than managing the disease. And if that is happening, then we will have to, technology-wise, end up at both the ends, data end and the end of high science. And more scientists we train in high science is going to help us. So all R&D focused companies will need to train and build platforms more and more.
What do you believe we need to emphasize? What do you believe we need to prioritize today?
Firstly, thank you, Shireen, for having me. I think my colleagues covered very comprehensively India for the world, right? But, coming into looking at it as an opportunity, a lot has changed in the positive direction. I want to talk first about how quickly we are able to now bring drugs into the country, make new launches. And 2 big things. Firstly, the community of doctors and patients is completely global. So before we can bring it to India, they know everything about what's available out there. So that puts a very positive pressure to quickly bring drugs. And the regulatory process to bring drugs into the country is getting much more, transparent and systematized in a sense. So whether it's the requirement for data, that's now very clear. Yes, we require clinical trials in the country, but that's made clear up front. Whether it's the whole subject expert committee, what are they going to look at when we submit dossiers? And the CDSCO is also looking at electronic submissions. We submit reams of data when it comes to one product, but that's all going electronic. So a lot is happening to streamline and make transparent how quickly we can bring products in the country. The second is the clinical trial infrastructure, and I think Sujay talked about it. It used to be perceived that, global companies want to come into India because it's,
But they can't.
But they can't, but actually now we can. I mean, for us as Pfizer, more than 25-30% of our trials are now in India. We are now starting to get India participation into global studies. So exactly the same protocols, but we have Indian patients. And that does 3 things. A, Indian patients get access to the product very quickly. B, Indian doctors get experience of the product, and then we've got data for Indian patients in India on how the drug works. So it makes it much more, it gives everyone much more confidence to use the product. So that is a big change. And then with the whole manufacturing ecosystem, I mean, as we look into it, more than 60% of what we sell in India is actually made in India. So we are as much an Indian pharma company in that sense, although sometimes we get branded differently. And that is just going to grow. I mean, Umang talked about biologics in India. We talked about we are now looking at every single product we make. The question is, could we make this in India? So I think it's on so many fronts, whether it's approvals, whether it's clinical trials, whether it's sourcing, India is now totally on the map for every function in Pfizer, and I'm sure that's true for all multinationals.
Well, that's good to hear. So you're saying that whether it's the regulatory ecosystem or it is just the maturity of the market, there is a convergence now, and we have seen an opening up, so to speak, on both sides, which makes it beneficial for companies like yours who are looking at the India opportunity. So if I were to ask you what the next 5 years would potentially look like, leave me with a number.
In terms of what would change?
The size, no, and what would the Pfizer size be as far as your India operations are concerned?
If I could predict, I'd not be here. But I think absolutely, but to answer more clearly, I mean, there's no reason why we couldn't treble. And I think one more important point I want to say is that, in the past, multinationals would see us as individual companies, and Indian companies are different. And now, increasingly, with every product we are bringing, the first question is, should we do it ourselves or should we do it with a partner who really knows the country? So I think that openness to, create a much bigger pie and get a smaller share of a bigger pie is a huge mindset change. And I think that is, partly it's our jobs to change those minds, but that is happening. So I think that's one, that, we could become treble, but that would happen if we partner with Indian companies, not when we are about to lose exclusivity, but when we are about to launch a product. That's going to be a big shift. The second is the sourcing part of it. The more we are going to source in India, the more we are going to help drive quality in India. And that is going to be, again, a huge big piece, right? So I think on so many fronts, there's a lot of work to be done by us, by other stakeholders. But I don't see why we couldn't treble, and we would not just do it ourselves. It would be in partnership with so many different stakeholders.